Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, we've got Tommy Robertson, an update from the UK about the latest terrorist attack, this time against Muslims in front of a North London mosque. We're also speaking to Emma Eros about her solutions in the ongoing fight against radical Islam. We're speaking to William Bourke about Australia's problem of huge immigration programs congesting our cities and driving down housing affordability. And a special treat by viewer demand. When I was in Toronto recently, I was able to catch up with Jordan Peterson, this wonderful Toronto academic who's pushing back against political correctness and language control. We've got that interview, plus Zeg's cartoons and so much more. Stay tuned. Well, trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs show. We don't have any political correctness, no language control. Unlike the mainstream media, we give you the straight facts and let you decide about what's going on in Australian politics and beyond. We're doing it now in partnership with Rebel Media. If you want to be part of Rebel Australia, register your name and email address at the all-important website, www.marklathamsoutsiders.com. And don't forget the first campaign we're running. We're running a campaign to tear down that curtain, and that's the address you need to go to, teardownThatCurtain.com. It's in reference to the petitioning that's gone up at Auburn swimming pool, Sharia law being imposed by the Cumberland Council. We're not having any segregation out of this program. We're campaigning hard against the idea of religious segregation where Islamic women are segregated away from the rest of the population at Auburn swimming pool. So support that, support the website, support Rebel Australia in all our various formats. Now for the show tonight, we've got a good list of guests, but I want to start with some comments about the mainstream media. We've seen Fairfax going broke, we've seen Channel 10 in deep financial trouble. People are asking right around the country, what's gone wrong with the mainstream media? Why are they destroying themselves? Well, in the past 7 days, we've had classic examples of where the mainstream media has gone off the rails. Unethical behaviour, incorrect information, running ideological agendas instead of the facts for the benefit of their viewers and their readers. And the first instance, of course, was Laurie Oakes, breaking the assurance of the Canberra Press Gallery that the comments at the midwinter ball by Malcolm Turnbull would be off the record. Oakes is part of that press gallery. He was bound by the obligation of the gallery to say that Turnbull could make those remarks off the record. Now, of course, Oakes had a spy in the audience. They screened it. It became a bit of an international event. But it's just another example of unethical behaviour where Turnbull was led down the garden path. Not often I have sympathy for Malcolm Turnbull, but I did in that particular circumstance. But it also exposed Laurie Oakes, this long-standing Channel 9 journalist, as a total hypocrite, because he's been writing articles for many, many years about the problem of white-bread, scripted, robotic politicians in Canberra. Oakes wants them to let their hair down, be a bit more natural. How can they do that? If someone like Turnbull, who said a few funny jokes, I thought it was quite amusing about Donald Trump, I'm sure the Donald could handle it. Turnbull said a few things that were funny, but of course it's all leaked out there by Oakes to try and enhance his reputation and diminish Turnbull. So of course at future events like that, nobody will be unscripted, nobody will be natural. They'll all be sticking to the script, robotic, white-bread politicians. So Laurie Oakes is a complete hypocrite in that regard. If he wants people to be a bit more natural in politics, stick by the rules and don't try and humiliate them just for telling a couple of jokes. Now beyond that, we've got other examples of the mainstream media running ideological campaigns. Quite amazingly, the ABC this week on its various platforms is screening a discredited American documentary called The Hunting Ground. It's supposedly about the incidents of sexual assault and harassment on American university campuses. Let's have a look at how it's introduced by the filmmakers themselves. They refer to 19 Harvard law professors. They've condemned the movie, but somehow the movie makers think that's an asset. Let's have a look at how they put it forward.
It was during the winter term of my 3rd year. I knew him really well. We'd met a couple of years earlier. The guy and my girlfriend who was over, we all met at my apartment to have some drinks beforehand, and then we went out to this bar. He continued to buy us both more drinks. half an hour into it, I noticed my girlfriend seemed wasted. People started to comment on how drunk my friend seemed. Almost instantly after we got into the taxi, I just felt this extremely heavy feeling come over me. My friend, she was just kind of passed out completely.
Now, the hunting ground doesn't get much better after that introduction, but the significance of the 19 Harvard law professors is this. They condemned the movie in 2015 as propaganda, as one-sided, as biased, as an inaccurate representation of sexual assault at American university campuses, and in particular, inaccurate representation of the allegations and the facts related to one of their students, Brandon Winston. Someone, a black American student who's accused right through this movie. Now, the 19 Harvard law professors, it's pretty rare you'd ever be condemned by people as illustrious as this, 19 Harvard law professors. They include Charles Ogletree, who is a mentor to Barack Obama and was the legal counsel for Anita Hill in her infamous sexual harassment case against Clarence Thomas. So he's got impeccable left-wing credentials. So too Nancy Gertner is one of the 19 professors condemning this movie as propaganda. She's a feminist icon. So these are not right-wing people, they're not conservatives, the 19, and they've outlined the case against this film as total propaganda. So why is it being screened at the ABC? Why is it being screened at the ABC at the cost of the reputation of this young man, Brandon Winston, who's been cleared in the American courts? He's been through enough already. He's had his reputation traduced in the United States, and now the ABC, our public broadcaster, seems determined to do it to him in Australia. This is what the Harvard law professors said about his circumstance. We believe that Brandon Winston was subjected to a long, harmful ordeal for no good reason. Justice has been served in the end. He was cleared, but at an enormous cost to this young man. We denounce, the Harvard law professors write, we denounce this film as prolonging his ordeal with its unfair and misleading portrayal of the facts of his case. They say he's been cleared totally, he was restored to the law school after a long delay, an unfair delay, and they conclude propaganda should not be allowed to erase this just outcome. So he's been through enough in the United States. Why would the ABC be trying to do in this young fella a second time in our country? And even worse, here's a tweet from the Sex Discrimination Commissioner at the Human Rights Commission, Kate Jenkins, publicising this movie as an important film. Well, the Human Rights Commission in this country is an absolute disgrace. Not content with having destroyed or tried to destroy the reputations and persecuted young men at the Queensland University of Technology over the fallacious 18C allegations against them. One of them, Callum Thwaites, had done absolutely nothing in the matter. Not content with doing over those students in Brisbane, the Human Rights Commission now wants to do over this young black American student a second time in our country in this disgraceful propaganda movie, The Hunting Ground. So it's an example of absolute left-wing bias. You see, at the Human Rights Commission, this imbecile Kate Jenkins, and at the ABC, they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in what these Harvard law professors, in reviewing all the evidence, have found. What they're interested in propaganda. They want to believe the worst about young men. They want to believe that these are sexual predators. Against all the evidence, against any sense of decency and justice and judging things as you find them, they're trying to do in this young man, Winston, and they're trying to do in other young men around Australian university campuses by propagating the material out of The Hunting Ground. Now, of course, it raises the question, why is propaganda being shown on the national broadcaster at taxpayer-funded expense when a movie like The Red Pill, which was an objective, balanced look at all the men's issues, Cassie J, the filmmaker, we've spoken about it previously on Mark Latham's Outsiders. Why is The Red Pill banned at so many cinemas? It wouldn't be screened on the ABC in a month of Sundays. The truth is the ABC wouldn't touch The Red Pill with a barge pole. So why have they got this double standard? Screening propaganda, The Red Pill, a balanced look at the issues. I mean, the Red Pill has several interviews from sociology departments in the United States. Left-wingers are all over the film putting their point of view, plus people from the men's rights movement. So why would it be banned, and why would Cassie J be treated so badly in the Australian media? Well, it's the double standard of the mainstream media. They want a certain view to be true. They pursue an ideological, a dogmatic agenda regardless of the facts. Let's have a look at how Cassie J was treated, for instance, on the 7 Sunrise weekend program by Andrew O'Keefe in a disgraceful interview where he hadn't even watched the movie.
So I decided to make a film about a voice for men and the men's rights movement and you know, the large scope of that, because no one had ever made a film about the men's rights movement before. And so I interviewed 44 different people for this film, feminists and men's rights activists. And, you know, it's a very complicated topic when looking at men's issues. It is,
you're absolutely right. But it just seems to me that you don't really question their views in the film.
Did you see the film?
Well, we saw as much as we could because your publicist wouldn't send us the full thing.
I sent you the screener link actually to the full film.
So we watched as much as we could, yeah. But
you could also buy the film on Google Play, Vimeo, and
we
Amazon
tried to do that and we couldn't.
Be that as it may, you know, it just seems from what I have seen of the film, there's not a lot of questioning of some of their views. That's all.
Yes, there is. Absolutely. If you've seen the film, you would see the questions that I asked and their answers. And this film is not propaganda. I'm not promoting any kind of view that the viewer should take away. It's simply a journey looking at what men's rights activists have to say, what the feminist rebuttal is, and the audience is able to make up their own mind.
So it's an example of hostility based on ignorance. Andrew O'Keefe's blinding ignorance. He reckons he's an expert about this film, even though he hasn't seen it. He said that it hadn't been sent to his particular show. Cassie J produced a whole bunch of emails to say that several versions of the film had been sent well in advance. Still, Andrew O'Keefe, professing some kind of interest in these issues, couldn't be bothered to watch it. I watched The Red Pill on Anzac Day, $7 through Vimeo. Now, I'm sure Andrew O'Keefe could afford $7 to watch it in April. He didn't watch it in April, he didn't watch it in May, he didn't watch it in June. So hostility based on ignorance, someone who couldn't be bothered to watch the film. I mean, if you do watch it, you'll see it's completely unexceptional. It's the type of conversation you'd find in any Australian cafe, workplace, community setting as they talk about the gender issues, men's rights, male disadvantage and the like, and some of the arguments put forward by the left-wing feminists. So Andrew O'Keefe, his views were grounded totally in ignorance. Again, an example of the mainstream media wanting a certain view to be true. His objection to the movie, and essentially this is the reason it's banned, is some of the comments that Paul Elam, who features in Cassie J's film, the comments Elam had made several years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. Elam said some stupid things along the lines of men should combat female domestic violence against them with their own domestic violence. Now that's a ridiculous thing to say, but he doesn't say those things in the film. It's a left-wing propaganda PC technique to say, oh, this fellow was offensive and unacceptable in the past. We can't ever hear his views ever again. Now they never apply that to their own left-wing people who say a lot of silly things, but Elam is supposed to be banned for life because of some stupid things he said 7 or 8 years ago, and even worse, Cassie J, who stands against those views, is not allowed to have her film aired because of something that one of the participants had said a long time ago. This is how the left try and impose their censorship, try and impose their PC. Now, it got worse in the Australian media. Jessica Rowe, not the sharpest tool in the shed. Let's have a look at how she processed her view that the red pill should be banned on Studio 10 program on Channel 10.
Can I say something here?
Sure. Go.
Well, yes, it would be good to see the movie, but it's, I mean, looking here, it talks about people who are pro-rape racists in the film. We have no problems, as we should not, banning people from visiting Australia preaching hate.
Hang on.
Aren't these people preaching hate who are in this film?
Well, we don't know.
But though obviously some people have seen it.
No, the bit about the pro-rape, the guy said if he was in a court, in a jury, and there was overwhelming evidence that the rape occurred, he'd still vote not guilty.
Now, obviously that guy.
But he didn't say that in the movie. He said this in a previous. So he's got form, but
so yeah, I must say I disagree with you guys.
You think it should be banned?
Well, yes, I do, because
so
I
people
think
should
if
be able
it
to
does,
say, F you, Fred,
no. I think if it does, no. I think if it offends, intimidates, or insults people, and it is not in the matter of public interest, I have no problems with this being banned.
It's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, amazing. Someone who hasn't seen the film, again, Jessica Rowe could have viewed the film easily. I'm sure she could afford the $7 in April, May or June, but again, out of ignorance, she wants the movie to be banned. You can see a little pea brain ticking over there, a tiny little brain trying to process reasons from a left feminist perspective for banning a movie. She's got notes there from someone who saw it. We don't know who that was, but she's going through the notes trying to work out in a tiny little mind reasons why the Australian public can't make up their own minds about the red pill, this particular documentary. It's just absurd. that level of censorship. I mean, her attitude is a reflection totally of left-wing arrogance and left-wing elitism. She hasn't bothered to see the movie. She's got some notes from someone who saw it. Again, offensive comments in the distant past by someone who participates in the movie, and that for her is enough to impose a restriction on free speech, a restriction on information, to impose censorship and political correctness. It's just appalling that the left take this stance, closing down public debate and the opportunity for the Australian people, you the viewers, to make up your own mind about that particular documentary. Now, could it get even worse? Well, Cassie J also had to endure the torture of going on The Project, interviewed by Waleed Ali and Carrie Bickmore. Let's see how she fared there.
Cassie, I think it could be to do with the fact that a couple of years ago our Australian of the Year was a mum who lost her only son at the hands of his father in a domestic violence incident. One woman is killed every week at the hands of domestic violence. It's really on the agenda here in Australia. It's not tolerated, and we're really trying to move forward and get it on a path where women aren't dying. I think that is why your film has hit a nerve.
And it was his son that passed?
It was her son who was killed by his father.
I didn't know about that, but that is interesting because it shows that there are male victims of domestic violence.
Sorry, that's the lesson you took?
Well, there you have it again. There's Carrie Bickmore running the line that the red pill is unacceptable because it doesn't pursue Rosie Batty's view of domestic violence. Well, Cassie J's her own filmmaker, and she was unaware of the tragic death of Luke Batty, but it just shows that the left-wing presenters, if it doesn't fit in with their preconceived view of the world, if it doesn't run the line that they want about patriarchy and all men being potential wife bashers, then a documentary shouldn't be shown and there should be hostility to it. This is just a ridiculous way in which to run public debate. And of course, it is the standard left-wing technique of censorship, where if someone appears in something like The Red Pill and they've said something offensive in the past, they're banned for life and the film is banned forever. Now, of course, do they apply that to their own people? How would their own left-wing activists who've all said something stupid or unacceptable in the past, how would they fare in getting invitations onto Weekend Sunrise or Studio 10 or The Project? How would Gillian Triggs go? Gillian Triggs is an habitual liar. That's the truth. She's lied to Senate committees and she's lied through her teeth in her exchanges with Chris Kenny this week about his desire to understand her point of view. Would Triggs get an invitation onto those programs? All her past sins would be forgotten. She'd be straight on to those soft left programs, no censorship for her. What about someone like Dee Madigan, who's laughed at the notion of disadvantaged men? She'd be straight onto those programs as well. Past, ridiculous, hopeless comments totally forgotten because she's from the left, and she'd be invited straight back onto The Project, Weekend Sunrise with Andrew O'Keefe and Studio 10. What about Mia Freedman, a sweetheart of the left, who this week put in the shocker of fat-shaming Roxanne Gay, saying she'd be too fat to sit in the chair at Mamma Mia, would they be able to fit her into the lift, all these things that the left feminists would be screaming about. Well, Mia Freedman, all her sins would be forgotten. Not so long ago she compared gay people to pedophiles. But because she's from the left, all those comments from the past are forgotten and she'd be invited straight back onto the programs. And what about Rosie Batty herself, the spearhead of the campaign on domestic violence, trying to demonise Australian men across the board? Has she got things that she said in the past that are unacceptable? Well, she has. She went through a terrible tragedy, but in setting up the Luke Batty Foundation, the truth about Rosie Batty is that she's been out there abusing and intimidating women in the workforce. 3 women that I know of have had to leave the Luke Batty Foundation because of the abuse from Rosie Batty. And let's look at some of the comments from one of them. In October last year, an ex-staff member at the Luke Batty Foundation said this: Rosie Batty did yell, scream and swear and often put the phone down on me, and she confessed at times that she'd been a bitch. So there's the evidence about Rosie Batty. The abuse was shocking as I understand it. Effing this, effing that, abusing women in the workplace. And then, of course, when those matters were made public, the same staff member was contacted by Rosie Batty. This is what she had to say in November last year. She had to ask Rosie Batty to stop contacting her, and she's still harassing her. And she was actually said if she was contacted again by Rosie Batty, she might have to report her for harassment. That's the direct quote from that ex-staff member at Luke Batty Foundation. I assume report Rosie Batty for harassment to the law enforcement agency. So Rosie Batty has got things wrong in the past, abusing women and driving them out of the workforce of the Luke Batty Foundation. Would she be invited back onto The Project or Studio 10 or Weekend Sunrise? Of course she would. All those sins of the past would be forgotten because she's from the left. So you've got this shocking double standard in the mainstream media. The hunting ground is screened, even though it's proven propaganda, And the red pill, a balanced movie, unexceptional, is banned because it's not running the line that the lefties want. And it's just another demonstration, the clearest demonstration yet, that this debate about what's acceptable and unacceptable speech in Australia, it's not about right and wrong. It's not about moral or immoral behaviour. It's not about offensive or non-offensive speech. It's about left and right. If you're a conservative or a libertarian and you said something in the distant past, they'll try and ban you for life to close down your speech, to close down your agenda, to close down your freedom to articulate a particular point of view, to control the public and media space. But if you're from the left, someone like Triggs or Madigan or Friedman or Batty, who've done and said things wrong in the past, you're automatically forgiven and you're given a leave pass to come back onto these shows. It's a shocking double standard, but a clear demonstration of how the left imposes their PC and their speech control at every single opportunity. So you're watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We've got an update from Tommy Robertson out of the UK, and after that, we've got a very important interview with Emma Eros about fighting back against radical Islam. Stay tuned.
There was a terrorist attack outside Finsbury Park Mosque, which seems to have been a white man. We're still yet to hear all the full details, but he's mowed people down in a similar way to the previous Islamic attacks we've seen here in the UK. Straight away, the response in the UK has been, for previous terrorist attacks that were from the Muslims, we're told to light candles, sing songs and hug each other. This time, it seems that there's allowed to be anger. Muslims are allowed to be angry. And it's actually being encouraged, it seems, and frustration, and Islamophobia must be dealt with. Whereas the root cause of all the previous terrorist attacks, no one wants to talk about, ever. Never mention Islam, never mention Muslims. Now, what this man has done is unforgivable, it's barbaric, it's wrong, and it can never be the answer or the solution to the problems we're in. This environment has been created. This anger and frustration that's inbred in this country. Our country is like a tinderbox. This summer, I'll be so surprised if there's not huge, huge chaos across this country this summer. Because what we've allowed is we've allowed an Islamic community to come into the country to breed extremism unchallenged for 20 years, supported, abetted by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran. Politicians hide the reality. We've had 2,000 British Muslims go and fight for ISIS. We've had over 500 of them are back here walking the streets with us. Now what I've done is I've warned time and time again of what you're going to create. And you're going to create monsters. And when I left the English Defence League 5 years ago, I said that in 5 years' time you're going to have English suicide bombers. Because you're going to create these men. You're given, when you have no light at the end of the tunnel. Now, bearing in mind, as an Englishman, as people in our country, we're scared. We're scared for our children's future. We're scared for our country, we're scared for our culture, we're scared for our identity. We're losing it. We're losing it and we're at risk. And we see no solution. And our politicians are not offering solutions, security services are failing us, everyone's failing us. And that's the environment where you create a monster. And all I've done is talk up and try to warn and try and beg that this doesn't happen. And now, somehow, I'm being blamed. It's like, oh, Tommy Robertson incited hate. No one can give me any time I've incited hate, ever. No one can give me an example. All I've done is tell the truth. Now, if giving you facts about ISIS is inciting hate, I'm guilty. If giving you facts about the extremism and the violence that's required in the Quran is inciting hate, I'm guilty. If all these things, if love of my country is inciting hate, I'm guilty. Facts are not hate speech. Okay? I give facts. I give reality to the problem we face, and I speak about it. And for that, I'm condemned, I'm attacked. And now, I'm somehow being blamed, even by politicians somehow, to be involved in this terrorist attack. So don't let any of this silence you. I know that my cause is just. I know that I have a righteous cause. So I'm not be deterred into silence in any way. I've never incited hate, never incited violence. Quite the contrary, actually. People dig through my speeches. After Lee Rigby's death, at the height of tensions in the UK, I said there's 600 Muslims in our armed forces, because there are. They're doing a hell of a lot more for our country than most British people. If you attack a Muslim woman, you're a coward. If you attack a mosque, you're a moron. These are never the answers. But having a problem with an ideology is very different to hatred towards people. I've always separated the two for every speech. Now, yeah, I'm still being blamed, still being tarnished. Yesterday, in our capital city, there was an Al-Quds march, and thousands of Muslims marched with Hezbollah and terrorist organisation flags, inciting hate, inciting murder for Jews. Our mayor said nothing, our government said nothing. We're yet to find out, maybe this man was Jewish. No one knows. Maybe this was a reaction. No one knows the motives yet. No one knows why this has happened or what's happened. But that's just an update on the UK, and to make sure that in the light of these instances, when they do happen, always speak out, always educate people that violence is never the answer. I've always said that. Violence is never the answer. But we must be able to explain why this comes about. and the environment that they're allowing and they're creating, which will flourish these men in this country. The country you're going to see our country turn to civil conflict. This is a start of sectarianism, which none of us wanted, and we've all screamed about to try and prevent. Thank you, Australia, and thank you, Mark Latham.
Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders, where I'm joined by Emma Eros. Now, I've got to say, I'm a little bit nervous, Emma. Last time you were in that seat, you had a big pie, literally smashing it into my face.
No pie today.
No pie today. I'm relieved to hear that because I'm still getting the dry cleaning done.
Gosh, no,
the clean up after that. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, thanks for having me again today.
No, well, a pleasure. You're here to talk about one of the huge issues around the world, radical Islamic terrorism. Now, as a mother, as a young Muslim, as a tradie, as a plumber, as a very practical person, we see these attacks around the world. We've seen them in Melbourne, we've seen them in London. How do you feel about it?
How does anyone feel about it? It's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible. These, you know what I call them? I don't call them losers, I know that they are. I call them actually Satan's apprentices. That's what I call them. And no person in their right mind will act and kill anyone in the name of God or kill anyone in general, full stop.
Well, something's going on in this religion of Islam that obviously has an element that's just horrific. What can we do about it?
Okay, well, I have some ideas about that, and I did look into the United Arab Emirates, and what they do is they regulate mosques and they monitor sermons, and everything is pre-approved. Now, why can't we do that? And in saying that as well, in Turkey and Italy, all sermons are practiced in the native language. So in Australia, I believe that half second and third generation don't understand Arabic dialect properly. So why can't they teach them at a certain time in English the path of the Prophet if they want to, and this way at least it's monitored and, you know, pre-approved what is stated, I think anyway.
So your concern is the sermons in Arabic, there's some radical
stuff. Of course, because you've got words of the Quran that's distorted, you know, and there is one common distortion here, which is kill the unbelievers wherever you see them. I mean, this was a verse in context of a war of self-defense back in, you know, the Prophet's life 1400 years ago. So it's not, you can't just cherry pick this verse thinking, oh, well, let's just kill them all because they're unbelievers and infidels and whatnot, right? This was based on a self-defense war in the Medina, which is the Prophet's mosque in Saudi Arabia. This is not to go on in today's society, 2017. History is there, you learn from it, you don't reenact it. You know, that's my opinion anyway.
Well, I think a lot of people would regard this as common sense because many people, Tony Abbott and others, call for a reformation of Islam, and even Waleed Ali has said Islam is a work in progress. So if it's a work in progress, why can't some of these violent verses be deleted or ignored or written away?
Well, it's because there's a beginning, a middle and an end. And as soon as you start to change things around, you've now lost and it becomes distorted. And this is why I believe scholars or whoever that is, you know, skilled to translate, because again, it is a big sin to translate wording out of the Quran if it's incorrect. And I believe many are doing that.
Right, so your solution is have these sermons in English.
In English. Turkey does it in Turkey,
Yep.
Italians does it in Italy. Well, we do the same. The Quran are prayers, they say it in the Arab dialect, but all stories, hadith, which are the paths of the Prophet, all those stories should be said in English in Australia, so these young youth can do it. I mean, you think about it, in, say, parents that were in this country, say, when they were 40 years ago, you didn't see them bombing around, did you? And they're like, you know, 60. You don't see a 60-year-old exploding themselves or anything like that, or killing
So in
people.
the countries you mentioned, they basically give a guarantee there's no radical preaching.
Well, if you have a look at United Arab Emirates, there is no, because they tackle it straight away. They don't stuff around, and you know they condemn them straight away. They stop them at their path. Where we're just lingering on, we just let them and let them and let them. Why? What do we have to do in order for this to stop? Okay, abide by the land of the law, make it a law. If you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear. That's you know, simple, right?
Well, I think a lot of Australians would support you because they're looking for realistic approaches here, not sort of theories or be nice or maybe it'll just go away. No. They're wanting realistic solutions.
Well, this is realistic, and this funding the safe space. Well, why fund out of taxpayers' money let the Islamic organisation have that in their mosques. There's millions around. Have them in their mosque. Let them have their little safe space there at their expense, because this shouldn't be a cost full stop. This should not be around.
Well,
we shouldn't be having to...
Does it worry you that the Islamic Council of Victoria, representing supposedly 200,000 Muslims, said that this safe space would allow young Muslims to sort of rant and rave against the West, rant and rave against our culture to get it out of their system? Surely that's
we got AA spaces. They're funded personally. There is a little. That's a charity organisation. They're not taxpayers funding. You got all these little, organisations for people that want to vent and go off. Well, okay, this shouldn't be a case. We shouldn't have to pay for it. It's not our problem really, but it's become our problem. So therefore, allow the mosques to allocate space for them and to do their job.
Right.
That's it.
And other sections of the Quran that might need updating, there's clauses there that basically say that it can be acceptable for the man to be violent to his partner as a last resort. We've had various public debates about this. It's another part of the Quran that's just incorrect, isn't it? Or inappropriate, inappropriate for our modern society.
We call them men with complex. They have issues. Any man or any woman, for that matter, that lays their hand on any individual is wrong. There is no such thing in my religion. Any man that touches me will bloody hell know about it. They'll know about it. No, I don't.
Well, let's hear what Kaiser Trad said about this when he was talking on the Bolt report earlier this year. He's a scholar of note, Kaiser Trad. Let's listen to his interpretation of this part of the Quran dealing with domestic violence.
Like I said, I've studied that verse in depth, and I've discussed it with a number of Islamic scholars. And what that verse is really putting a scenario is, if you come home and you're really, really angry, and we've seen many men act violently towards their women. What this verse is saying really is playing on the psychology of the man, saying violence is a last resort. The first thing that you must do is counselling. Now, the word admonish as a translation, I don't like it, because the Arabic word is fa'idhuhunna, which means give them advice or engage in counselling or anything of that nature. So what it does is a calming effect. Before you even consider using your hand, before you consider any act of violence, have you checked box number 1, which is counselling? Have you checked box number 2? What does counselling entail? Well, maybe next time you should bring her a bunch of flowers. Maybe next time you should bring her a box of chocolates. Maybe next time you should take her out on
beat her. If she still won't see sense, beat her. That's what this is.
Well,
beat them. I'm reading the Quran.
Well, I suppose it's easy to pick on Kaiser Trad there, but he's giving a valid interpretation of what's actually in the Holy Book. How do you feel about it, Emma, when you hear
I think it's a load of shit. Right. I believe it's a load of shit. God does not create anybody so they can be treated by somebody else this way. We're not animals. We're not in a third world country, for starters. There is help for women. Women need to get out of situations like that. You don't love someone that much to have them treat you like this, or abuse you in a way where sorry doesn't cut it. It's ridiculous. And there is nowhere in the religion, in my mind, that this means the case. It's bullshit.
So Islamic leaders need to stand up and denounce this provision and basically say it doesn't apply in our modern society?
Of course they need to, and you do have some that are. But you have to understand too, there's 73 types of Islam, and this is where people get it wrong. You've got the Sunni, the Shiites, the Alawites, you've got so many, and they all have their little what they go by, and that's where they clash and they some of them hate each other. But in the end, they're all still the Prophet's relatives. History in itself goes a long way. But no, there is no such thing. You don't touch anybody. Only a small man syndrome beats a woman up, and a crazy, insecure woman does the same.
Well, you've raised an interesting point, the 73 interpretations of Islam. Because I think it's little understood in the West that there is a lot of diversity of opinion and preaching within the religion itself. So how do you deal with something that's sort of so wild?
Regulate and monitor, and you know what, the other thing? Shut down. Our government needs to, grow some balls, shut down all dodgy backyard prayer centres, because this doesn't help.
And what's your own background in the religion, where your family has come from and the particular group or outlook that you've practiced?
Well, we are Muslim, Sunni. I accept all religions. I like studying religions because in the end, I tell you one thing, there's one God, the creator of all mankind and the universe. We are all God's children.
From Lebanon, is that where your family came
my family's from Lebanon, but I was born here.
You were born here, but Sunni.
Sunni, yes, that's right. And, you know, like I say to everyone, Christian, you know, Jewish, God has many names in many religions. In the end, we all believe in the one God that's created us. We are God's children. So therefore, anyone that's, you know, behaves out of, you know, crazy, killing people, whatever, they're just Satan's worshippers. And if you want to distort words for your benefit, then it becomes a business. And I think a lot of the time religion has become a business. Not just Islamic religion, many religions.
So you're saying Islam can work successfully if
regulate,
people
monitor,
adopt what you're saying?
Yeah, regulate, monitor. Should be nothing to hide, nothing to fear. And I keep saying that because we in this country abide by the land of the law. Okay, well, government, grow some balls, start making some laws and start shaping it up before it just goes all radical.
Well, this is why I love having Emma on the show. If you talk about the young female voice of Islam in Australia, it's the dreadful Abdel Megeed, Yasmin Abdel Megeed, that's been promoted on the ABC and SBS and elsewhere. I think the government should be promoting people like Emma with a modern, contemporary, civilised, positive attitude about these issues and actually advocating reforms that would make our society stronger and safer. So congratulations on the work you're doing, Emma. But as a second generation migrant, you've also been thinking about the question of migrant contribution in Australia.
Absolutely.
Senator David Lionel from the Liberal Democrats has put forward some ideas that perhaps we should have a system where people pay to come to Australia. We're a country that's...
yeah, but that's a one-off and then they'll find a way they can't pay. So I propose a better idea.
Okay, what's your idea?
And I need the people to annoy their, you know, local members. I need them to call their radio stations, ask your friends, talk to your family. Just, I want to know their view and your view about this. And so basically it's a future citizen payback scheme where this is only a concept, but hopefully it can be a policy. Where basically, just an example, 75% of welfare payments given to these people must be paid back. They have, you know, 3 years to learn the language, culture, values, as well as culture, values, and mandatory volunteer work. So once mandatory. And if they find a full-time job prior, then that's great because that's when their 10 years tax positive tax contribution can be, you know, to begin. And once they've done the 10 years positive tax contribution, they can apply to become a citizen in this country.
So you're changing the onus of contribution. Migrants coming here are expected to make these contributions. If they draw on the welfare system, like the HEX scheme for university students, they've got to pay back.
That's exactly right. You know, goose gander as far as I'm concerned. Right. And I know this sounds harsh, but we know this happens. If they have half a dozen children, they are still not citizens of this country until that 10 years tax contribution is paid, only because to prevent loopholes. And we seem like our government doesn't cover loopholes, I've noticed in many other aspects. So this is to prevent. And again, if they don't find work after the 3rd year and they've been volunteering, well, maybe we need to be a little bit unkind and slash their welfare again just to give them that motivation.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're talking a lot of common sense that Australians would support, and we need to get you into politics. I think you've got a lot of better ideas than Labor and Liberal at the moment. I think Peter Dutton is going okay as Immigration Minister. Do you like his approach?
You know what? I like him more if he does this one.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's the sort of thing Dutton should be looking at. And why not have a HEX scheme for migrants? A lot of people come here, maybe they start on a bit of welfare and then they work, like you're in a business and doing really well in the plumbing trade. If people become successful, they can pay a bit back to the country, and that
and you know what?
eases the financial burden.
Well, by having this, Mark, it does. It eases the welfare system, and, you know, we know that at least veterans won't have to suffer, pensioners won't have to suffer, because it's not money just constantly. What's our government doing to generate money? It's not. It's robbing off Peter to give to Paul, which is, you know, ridiculous.
Well, keep up the great work. We want to have you back on with all your wonderful ideas, your common sense that you speak, and thank goodness tonight there's no pie.
No pie. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be back after a short break with more of Mark Latham's Outsiders. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. We're coming to you in front of the Spencer Hotel in Whyalla in South Australia, one of the great outsider drinking holes. One of the great issues we want to address in this segment is the problem of overpopulation. Australia's massive immigration program, more than 200,000 people a year coming into the country under Big Australia. Now, one of the very good organisations pushing back against this nonsense is Sustainable Australia. And I'm delighted to say that William Bourke is here, the head of Sustainable Australia. So William, for the benefit of our viewers, can you give us a bit of an outline of the background of the organisation and in particular some of the work you've done with Dick Smith, who's a very powerful advocate against overpopulation growth in Australia?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. Great to be on your program. Sustainable Australia Party is a federally registered political party. We were formed in 2010. We've contested a federal election and we got over 1 million votes in the Senate, top 6. We stand for an economically, environmentally and socially sustainable Australia. And what we're campaigning on is issues like secure jobs, affordable housing, better planning and a sustainable environment. And of course, you can't have those things unless you include population in the policy mix. Yeah, look, Dick Smith is a good friend of the party. We work with him from time to time. We know he's got a few things going on and he supported me, for example, when I stood in the North Sydney by-election back when Joe Hockey left for the States. So Dick's a really good friend of the party and from time to time we work with him on different projects.
Are you surprised in the great debate about housing affordability there's really just been one-sided argument that politicians, Labor and Liberal, they've got a unity ticket on this, it's a one-party point of view. They only talk about increasing supply of housing to supposedly bring down prices. No one ever talks about the logical side on the logical argument on the other side of the housing market, which is to bring down housing demand by cutting immigration.
Well, Mark, at university I learnt about the law of supply and demand. We know that population growth is a great driver of demand in Australia and we've got record population growth thanks to record immigration. We need affordable housing for first home buyers and renters. We've got a crisis in this country in housing affordability. So to not address population and immigration-fed population growth in Australia, it's just like walking up a down escalator. You're not going to get anywhere on a critical issue that young Australians and all Australians are really, really concerned about.
Well, you see, it's a good point. I live in Western Sydney where there's massive population growth. I mean, whole suburbs and neighbourhoods are springing out of the ground like molehills. But I don't think there's a lot of public awareness about where the people are coming from. It's almost like, oh, they drop from the sky, they live next door, that's just the way it is. But I think we need a public program of putting out the facts about the impact of big immigration. Now, you've got some graphics, some material we're going to bring up on the screen to show what impact population growth derives from big immigration. So can you just run us through this particular graphic here about where our population would head under different immigration scenarios?
Yeah, definitely. I guess we start at the year 2000 when we had about 19 million people. We're already up to 24 million. So just in that really short period of time, we've added 25% more people to our population. We're feeling it. Our roads, our hospitals, our schools, they're all feeling the strain. So we've now got this choice. The Big Australia trajectory is to double our population to about 40 million.
So is that with current projections of immigration? If we maintain 200,000 plus per annum immigration, we end up a combined population there of the green band and the orange, 40 million people by the year 2050.
Exactly. We end up with that population explosion right up to 40 million by 2050. You can see it there. If we, on the other hand, go back to the long-term average immigration program of 70,000, we're now over 200,000. If we go back to our long-term average, which is still a significant number, 70,000 permanent migrants per year.
As dramatically.
We taper off and we go to around 26, 27 million at 2050.
That's the green band there on the graph. So it's a huge difference, isn't it?
It's a massive
difference, what, of about 13 million people just by virtue of the immigration policy decisions that are made out of Canberra.
That's right. And because our fertility rate is around 2 children per woman or just under, we know that the big driver of population growth now in Australia is immigration. Now, we all support immigration. All of us support, new people coming to Australia, but it's just got to be done in sustainable numbers.
It's a huge difference. And where do we put the extra 13 million? From a Western Sydney perspective, I'm buggered if I know where they go, because we're running out of land in the Sydney Basin. We're not a country that's ever embraced decentralisation. We cling to the coast. The reality is that the 13 billion extra is at a big cost to the environment, but you don't hear anything from the Greens, do you?
No, you don't, unfortunately. Where do all of these new people go? They basically are starting to get stacked up in high-rise in our current suburbs, as well as massive sprawl onto our farmland. So it's a lose-lose situation. We are overloading all of our infrastructure that we've built in our current suburbs, and we're destroying our farmland and our environment and our animal habitats on the edge of our cities. As you say, many governments over the years, from Gough Whitlam through to today, they're saying, decentralise, decentralise.
Never happens.
It never happens. It's a really good theory, and I think all of us support it in theory, but there's more than enough people in our already overcrowded cities to move to the regions if there were the jobs, if there was the infrastructure, if there was the water. And migrants don't want to go to the regions. No. They want to come to where they've got family and familiar culture. So 90% of migrants will always come to the city. And even if you say move to the regions, they move there for 2 years, 4 years, they get their permanent residency citizenship, 5 minutes later they're back in the city. Yep. So it's not going to work. We need to slow population growth.
Yeah. Now run us through your second graphic, because it has a look at the nature of the immigration program currently compared to past practices. You can see there, William, the fact that 200,000 a year is quite aberrant. It's not consistent with the Australian long-term average, is it?
No, that's right, Mark. Over the 20th century, and I think our migration program worked so well in the 20th century. We had people coming from around the world. There was great integration of our migrants. Therefore, really good inclusion of migrants these days. The second generation really gets included in our leadership, in our society, in our politics. That was about 70,000 per year.
Okay, that's the 100-year average.
The 100-year average for the 20th century, about 70,000 per year. So that worked really well, I think. And then we hit John Howard. We hit John Howard, who then wanted to, I think, really clamp down on workers' rights, flood the market with more migrants, and build more customers for their big business donors. So then we tripled migration to over 200,000 a year. It's not about refugees, they're only about 14,000 a year.
Well, Howard was infamous for the refugee debate, but elsewhere he was pushing big Australia.
Absolutely. So it was a two-card trick on the Australian people. It was let's, stop the boats, and let's open the floodgates for everyone else. So we've,
and people didn't really notice.
They didn't notice
the floodgates.
It was a massive bait and switch by John Howard, and it's been continued right through to the current politicians. They're pretending to have secure borders. We've got the most open borders we've ever had in our history.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting development, and it just shows anyone who thinks, oh, that's just the migration program we've got. The big numbers now are actually inconsistent with our past. It worked a lot better in the 20th century. Now, what about the impact on wages growth? You've got a graph here that looks at the problem of stagnant wages in Australia. It's a huge issue right across the economy, living standards. Run us through this one.
That's right. Look, as I said, John Howard really is the big daddy of big Australia. Around 2000 there, as our migration program went up, the overall impact is lower wages. We've been used to 3-4% wage growth per year on average. We're now down to record low of under 2%, around 1.7, 1.8%, at a time of skyrocketing house prices, energy prices, water prices. So our wages are stagnant and our costs of living are going through the roof. It's no wonder so many people are doing it tough.
Well, economists often argue, they're saying at the moment, oh, we don't understand why the economy's growing but wages are flat, and why people are doing it tough. Well, it just stands to reason, doesn't it? If you flood the labour market with a greater supply of labour, you will have downward pressure on the wages.
Exactly. Once again, the law of supply and demand applies here. And we've also seen other factors like record youth unemployment, the flooding of the entry-level job market with so-called foreign students who are largely really economic refugees. We welcome foreign students into Australia, but they shouldn't be it shouldn't be a backdoor migration program. It should be a genuine foreign student, international student program.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bodgy scheme at the moment
very
with
bodgy.
unintended consequences.
Caltex, 7-Eleven, the list goes on and on. So what we've seen in Australia is average wages growth at record lows. We've also seen average hours worked per month, again from about the time of 2000 at about 150 hours a month. The average hours worked is down to about 140 per month. So we're seeing wage declines in Australia in terms of job security, increased casualisation of the labour force. So we need secure jobs, not, you know, this undermining of our workers.
Yeah, and you've got some evidence that perhaps the quality of labour coming in is not as skilled as the government makes out. They say it's about 2/3 skilled labour, but you've got some stats showing it's closer to 1/4.
Absolutely. I've done some research on this. I've looked at the ABS stats and the Department of Immigration stats, and what we've found is that even though the government claims that of the around 200,000 migrants per year, around 60% or more is in the skilled category, they play a trick on the Australian people once again. They hide the family of the skilled migrant in the skilled migrant
they're
category.
Included in.
They're included
even
in
though they might be unskilled.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
You know, they're all demanding skills. You know, the children
Right.
need schools,
Yeah.
need teachers. The husband or the wife, they need doctors and dentists and so forth. So really only 1 in 4, only about 25% of our migration program is bringing in the skills that we actually demand. And frankly, whether we demand them or not is another question. And whether they end up working in the category that they got the skilled migration entry for, that's not enforced either. So the whole thing is just a schmozzle. We need to put a broom through the whole program, look at it all again, and come up with a proper skills list that actually, you know, fills our needs.
Yeah, well, credit to you and Sustainable Australia, because Labor and Liberal got the same immigration policy, so they don't want scrutiny of these facts that you're talking about.
No.
So you're really one of the few people publicly, you, Dick Smith and some others, just a small number, who are actually highlighting the truth for the benefit of the Australian electorate.
Exactly, and you know, through independent media like this, we're able to actually talk to your average Aussie, give them the facts, give them, you know, a debate and a democracy that actually listens to them.
Yeah, and how do you combat the influence of the interest groups? Because what I see with the Labor and Liberal having the same bipartisan immigration stance, a one-party immigration policy, is that so many interest groups back them in. The business sector, the retailers, the advertisers, housing, construction industry, of course. The Greens don't say anything these days. Treasury backs this, the ethnic leaders, the New Left, the MPs support it. How do you go fighting these interest groups who are massive? It's a real David versus Goliath, isn't it? You're the David.
Yes.
Can you whack them in the forehead?
Look, occasionally we land a bit of a blow, but look, at the end of the day, what we want is a democracy. We want a democracy where everyone gets a say, everyone gets a go, and we've got this, if you like, a hijacking of our democracy by these vocal minorities, these really powerful vested interests, the big end of town, as well as this new left that's overtaken a lot of our media voices. The average punter in the street, the research shows 70% of Australians don't want this big Australia. But, you know, we're dominated by this unholy alliance of this new left and this big business that's basically overriding the average person's voice. So, you know, we're trying to build this political movement, Sustainable Australia, a centrist political party, campaigning on a number of things, as I say, jobs, housing, planning and environment. But you've got to be talking about population within those issues and just giving the average person, you know, someone in Parliament that will represent them.
Yeah, well, even if you don't win parliamentary seats, I'd argue you're doing a great public service by breaking the big party consensus here and putting the facts out plainly to the Australian people so they can get an understanding of where is all the population coming from, why is the suburb so congested, why is the road so blocked. Why has Australia got these ecological problems into the future because of overpopulation? So more power to you, and I hope Sustainable Australia keeps its public profile, and you're always welcome here on Mark Latham's Outsiders, William. And just stay there while we go through some of our cartoons. We've got a cartoonist in residence here, the great Zeg, who's always got a great take on the week just past, and his first cartoon this evening is one related to our campaign. Don't forget that campaign, teardown.thatcurtain.com. No segregation at any Australian public facility, and Zeg's got to take a fella and his son driving past the wall that's been built by the council to shield the female Islamic pool, and he's saying it's there on the other side, but now it's criminal to point my son with the Harmony Day stickers. So that's a pretty good representation of where all this could end if we go down the path of Islamic segregation at these public facilities. And the second Zeg cartoon is one of our favourites, Gillian Triggs. I mentioned her earlier on, all the lies she's telling in her exchanges with Chris Kenny from the Australian newspaper. There's Triggs, another act of delusion. It's a freezing cold winter night in this dark forest, and she's out on the beach with all the people in their keenies. So thanks for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We'll be back shortly with a tremendous interview out of Toronto with Jordan Peterson, a legend in that country. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. Now, a few weeks ago when I was in Toronto, Canada, I recorded an interview with a very important person, Professor Jordan Peterson, the preeminent academic around the world pushing back against political correctness and language control. So many of our viewers have said, get Jordan Peterson on. So by popular demand, here's that pre-recorded interview with a very, very important man doing great work. Well, Professor Jordan Peterson from the University of Toronto, thanks for joining us on Mark Latham's Outsiders. You're certainly doing a great job in pushing back against political correctness. Where do you think this insidious form of language control has come from, and why has it emerged so quickly in recent years to dominate political debate?
Well, you know, I don't think it's emerged recently. I think it's been emerging in bits and pieces for a very long period of time. I think the initial fundamental boost, at least insofar as the campuses were concerned, was in the 1960s when there was a real upsurge of leftist sentiment, let's say. Now, that was driven, we should be clear about this, that was driven by some real concerns, the civil rights movement, for example, and also by young people's concerns about being shipped off to what was at least a very brutal and hard to understand war. And so then the universities took a real tilt towards political activism in the 1960s and early 70s, and the campuses and the professors got radicalized. And then there was another real leap forward from a conceptual perspective in the 1970s, because Marxism per se had pretty much become, what would you say, discredited as a consequence of the catastrophes that it had produced in places like the Soviet Union and Maoist China. And so by the 70s, even if you were a French intellectual, you couldn't have your head stuck so far in the sand that you could still be an apologist for Stalin. But what happened then was that the Marxist types they reconfigured their theory and rebranded it in some sense as postmodernism. That's a bit of an oversimplification, obviously, and then instead of the working class against the bourgeois, it became the oppressed versus the oppressor, and everything was read through that lens. And that was really a consequence of the contributions of people like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault and their coterie of French intellectuals. And so that became intellectually respectable again in the 1970s, a lot through the efforts of the Yale University English department. And then there was another big move forward in the 1990s. Political correctness was a big deal for about 3 or 4 years in the early 1990s, but it sort of faded away. And I think that was partly because the U.S. economy started to boom and people just weren't they were interested in other things. But as this entire time period progressed, the university professors and administrators became more and more radically leftist, I would say. And now that we're seeing the full fruit of that over the last 5 years. So it's been a long time coming, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it seems to be reaching a climax now. You mentioned French intellectuals, Foucault, post-structuralist Marxism and the like. Do you think political correctness is, in a perverse way, a sign of the weakness of the left, that having tried to control economic means of production, social services, the role of government, and those projects having collapsed in large part because of the fall of the Berlin Wall, that the left has had to move from structural issues of how societies run into things like behaviour, feelings and language control expressed through political correctness. So this is almost like, for the left, their last hope. It's an interesting way of
looking at it. I mean, I do think that the Marxist rebranding under the postmodernist guise was definitely a consequence of the intellectual unsustainability of any prolonged defense of Marxist politics, philosophy, and economics. So, and then I also think that the attempt by the postmodernist social constructionists in particular to attempt to enforce a social constructionist view of gender and other such things by law is also a consequence of the fact that they've absolutely lost the battle from a scientific and philosophical perspective. I mean, no self-respecting scientist with any genuine scientific training believes for a moment that every element of sexually sex-associated behavior, the differences between men and women, can be attributed to socialization. I mean, no one credible has believed that, I would say.
So you see a link then between identity politics. Would you see a link between identity politics and political correctness? That identity politics, trying to get young people in particular agitated and uprising about their identities, it's one side of the coin, and on the other you've got political correctness using the language control as a way of creating identity agitation.
Oh yeah, I think they're expressions of the same underlying phenomena. You know, I've often recommended to my listeners a book by Stephen Hicks called "Explaining Postmodernism," which I would recommend to your listeners as well. If it's I think it's quite a good book. The first chapter is particularly instructive. Doesn't take long to read. That's "Explaining Postmodernism" by Stephen Hicks, and that does a nice job of describing the philosophical territory from which all of this is emerging, in my estimation.
You're doing a great role on social media in pushing back against political correctness. How did it start, for the benefit of the Australian audience? How did it start for you here in Canada on this debate about C16 in September of last year?
There's a bill that was being put forward at the federal level, purporting to merely add gender identity and gender expression to the list of protected groups, the groups protected by the Canadian Human Rights Act, and also to make discrimination and harassment on those grounds something that you could be prosecuted for under the hate crimes provision of the criminal code. And, you know, that in itself doesn't sound particularly reprehensible, except for the fact that it's very difficult to define such things as gender expression in particular, which really boils down to not much more than fashion choice, even in the terminology of the people that are pushing it. But the pernicious thing about that is that the bill was to be interpreted in light of policies that had been established by a provincial agency called the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and they're definitely possessed to the nth degree by postmodern ideology. And the surrounding policy within guidelines that would have been used to interpret Bill C-16 are absolutely dreadful. And one of the funny things that happened actually is that the federal government had originally linked directly to the Ontario Human Rights Commission website to describe how this new legislation would be interpreted. But when the publicity about Bill C-16 started to become somewhat politically intolerable, they took that link down to hide the connection between the two, which I think was really scandalous. But anyways, I made a video about Bill C-16 after reading the Ontario Human Rights Commission website, trying to explain why the legislation was so muddle-headed and pathological, even for the people that it purported to protect, because it basically forces into law the assumption that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual proclivity are very independently and are all fundamentally consequence of socialization, with the possible exception of, let's say, anatomical differences between men and women. And the problem with that perspective, apart from the fact that it's just simply wrong, both statistically and factually, is that one of the strongest arguments that gay people and transgender people use to justify their existence, let's say, but certainly their existence as valued citizens and the fact that rights should be extended to them, is basically a biologically determinist argument, which is, well, I was born this way. Homosexuality is a biological phenomena, as is transgenderism. And I'm not saying that that's canonical truth, nor that it's true in every case, but it is a very powerful argument, and it has been used very frequently by people who've been putting forth claims that sexual proclivity and identity should be considered part of the broad expression of intrinsic humanity and protected in that way. But this new legislation just guts that, because it insists, A, that such things are at most socioculturally constructed with no biological basis whatsoever, and at minimal, or even more extremely, nothing but the kind of whim that can change entirely subjectively on a day-to-day basis. And so I looked at the legislation and I thought, not only was it a threat to free speech, partly because it impelled people to use certain types of address, the preferred pronouns that the radical postmodernists have been making up, but also did nothing to advance the cause of the very people that it was supposed to be helping. So I made a video about that, and I released it on YouTube back in September, and that created a political firestorm that really hasn't subsided in the 8 months since it was released, which is, absolutely beyond belief to me. It's beyond my understanding that could be the case, but it certainly has happened.
Well, you're fighting a great fight. And why do you think there are so few academics willing to take this stance? I know there's a lot of pushback and abuse on social media. Have you found that intimidating? Why haven't you got more academic colleagues pointing out the common sense that you've been articulating?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, I think. And one is that academics, especially the scientific types, tend to be rather apolitical. And they would rather ignore all this, let's call it nonsense, although there's more to it than that, and concentrate on their research and on their students and their teaching, which is what they're supposed to be doing. And when things are functioning properly, that's actually not a bad attitude. So the biologists and so forth just aren't taking this kind of threat seriously enough, but they will, because it's coming their way. So that's reason one. Reason two is the general tendency of people, academic and otherwise, to keep their head down if there's a battle. People. One of my colleagues expressed it very well to me just before I made the first video, which was, well, I could stand out and say something, but the personal cost to me would be overwhelming and the social benefit would be negligible. Now, I think that's a defensible stance from a logical perspective, but I think that it has a serious flaw, which is why I decided to go ahead and make the video, which is that the only people that can ever speak out against developing oppression are individuals. And you pay a price for remaining silent, just like you pay a price for speaking. And I believe that the price for speaking is much lower than the price for remaining silent. But most people don't share that viewpoint. It's really funny, though, watching this, because there has been a handful of academics who've spoken up, like Camille Paglia and Christina Hoff Sommers and Gad Saad and Janice Fiamenko in Canada, and they've been going on the attack. They're not in defensive mode, right? They're actually bringing the fight to the postmodernists, and those people are doing just fine along with me. Like, it seems more that if you wait for people to ferret you out in your burrow and expose you, then you're really looking to be stripped naked and whipped in public. But if you take the fight to the people that might come after you, then you have a much higher probability of winning.
Right. It's better to be proactive. Well, I agree with that. Can I just say, I've got a 14-year-old son who's crazy about memes. And I'm always joking with him that I'm a meme expert, when of course I'm not. I know nothing about it. And I'm fascinated by your use of memes here, or commentary about them, these characters, Keck and Pepe. What's it all about, Professor?
Well, there's a bunch of things up with that. I mean, the first is that for whatever reason, I've been drawn into that particular element of this sort of thing for a variety of reasons. I'm very interested in symbolism, and I have a very large number of lectures on YouTube, about 250 hours worth, that discuss the psychology of symbolism and religious belief. And so the use of this new iconography is really extraordinarily interesting to me. And the phenomena of this strange little frog called Pepe, who's been identified as a hate symbol by no less than Hillary Clinton, I think is really fascinating, because the Pepe symbol is a form of satirical protest, as far as I can tell, more than anything else. And so I've been following that and studying it, and I'm interested in the frog symbolism. I did a lecture or a YouTube video with a carver of Orthodox icons named Jonathan Pageau on the metaphysics of Pepe, which people could watch if they're interested in this. But I'm curious about the manifestations of protest that are emerging collectively online, because they seem to be taking the form of a giant satirical protest. And I don't think we've necessarily seen anything like that before. So I think that's absolutely fascinating. And there's a strange twist to it that's also dragged me in, as people had been noting for a number of years. I've had videos online since 2013 that my voice is reminiscent of Jim Henson's Muppet Kermit the Frog.
Right.
And so I made a comical video, although it was very serious in intent, noting this resemblance and putting myself forward, strangely enough, as spokesfrog, warning about political correctness. And that also got me more tangled up with this frog symbolism issue that's been circulating around this symbol of Pepe. It's very complicated and strange, but that's a relatively brief answer to the question.
Okay, I'll get my son to give an assessment of that as well. He's right into it, but I think it's great. You're able to communicate with younger people that way. It's very important.
Well,
because
the other thing that strangely happened is that I've become a target for these memes. So, for example, on website, it's quite well known, Reddit. Of course, everybody knows about Reddit. There's a subreddit devoted to memes about me, strangely enough. And there must be 300 of the bloody things by now. And basically what they do is cut pictures of me or things that I've said and put them in little, like, cartoon posters and that sort of thing. And so that's also been extraordinarily strange, and I've been watching that develop, and with a fair bit of amusement, I would say, more than anything else, because the kids that are doing it, they're mostly young men. Certainly, at least in relationship to me, don't seem to be doing it maliciously. And like, I've got nothing against people having a sense of humor, and you could use a sense of humor when you're dealing with with people who are fundamentally politically correct, for example. So that's been another side issue of the meme war, let's say. It's a very peculiar sociological and psychological phenomena, and it's been very interesting to watch and to participate in to some degree.
Well, Jordan, you've got lots of supporters in Australia really taking notice of your work in social media, and we'd love to know, what plans have you got for the future? You're keeping up the fight.
Well, one of the things that I'm planning to do is, apart from continuing to produce YouTube videos, I'm doing one right now, a series of lectures on the psychological significance of the Bible. And I see that as the cornerstone to the introduction of high-quality humanities education on a global basis. And that's something that I want to work on pursuing over the next few years. I've been talking to a business partner of mine who's a very good computer programmer, and to a number of financiers and other academics and educators about the possibility of starting the process of putting extremely high quality education in the humanities and literature online as an alternative to these deadened cult-like Marxist humanity / postmodern offerings that the universities have. I mean, I see the universities as they're too expensive, they're too administratively top-heavy, they're too overburdened by law. They've abandoned their central commitment to knowledge. They're not teaching people how to write. They're putting them in debt. In the United States, they're putting them into debt in ways that you can't remove through bankruptcy. And so the price of your second-rate humanities education in the United States is increasingly a large student debt that you can't shake for the rest of your life. To me, that's all indicative of a system that's on its last legs. And so one of the things I really want to do over the next, let's say, 3 to 4 years is to start developing what would be the online equivalent to a classic humanities institute. And I want to put a lot of time and effort into that. Wow. So I've got that in the biblical series. I've started a series of discussions with Muslims. The first one was with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I interviewed on Thursday, but I want to do a regular series to have a discussion about Islam and about how it can exist in relationship to the West, whether it can exist in relationship to the West peacefully, and how that might be attained, and what the options are.
Well, that sounds absolutely vital work. We wish you every success with that. Professor Jordan Peterson, thanks for talking to Mark Latham's Outsiders in association with Rebel Media, and we will watch your work with ongoing fascination. Many thanks.
Well, thanks very much, and hello to everybody in Australia.
And after this break, we'll come back with more Mark Latham's Outsiders. Thanks for watching the show. Don't forget the website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. You can register there for Rebel Australia, all our important work. Don't forget the petition we're running, teardownThatCurtain.com. And can I just flag a new segment I want to run from next week? We get so much valuable viewer feedback here. Off the Facebook page, off our website, so many of you have put in some tips and items about atrocities, left lunacy, injustices in the system, standing up for the little guy. I really appreciate all that feedback. It's been invaluable in preparing important material for this show and elsewhere. So what I want to do is also open it up for viewer feedback, letters, comments, items you want to submit at the end of next week's show and thereafter. In our last segment, we're going to have the viewer feedback and letters. So please send in your correspondence to mark.latham@therebel.media. That email address should be there on your screen, mark.latham@therebel.media. No com on the end, just .media. So send in all your correspondence. I want the best views and opinions out there, all the outsiders having their say, so important in Australian politics dominated by the mainstream media and the insider club, running their own little ideological agenda. Let's open it up here at Mark Latham's Outsiders for your opinion at mark.latham@therebel.media. Send in those emails. I can't wait to read them and put them up on screen for next week and beyond. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next Wednesday evening. Cheers.